is also called brine. Brine. Brine is the industrial term used for NaCl when it is concentrated. So examiner normally doesn't ask brine, but sometimes in MCQs they put it in words like which of the following solution will form chlorine at the anode. तो उसमें option is concentrated NaCl or sometimes brine word is written. So NaCl concentrated solution is also called as brine. अच्छा अब इसमें will follow the same pattern and that selective discharge series that I explained yesterday. Positive ion key, negative ion key, we'll use that and we'll decide about the ions which are formed accordingly at cathode anode. So I'll list down the things that we'll be covering in all these experiments. First we'll write ions. अब ions में naturally if it's concentrated NaCl, we will have positive negative ions, sodium and chloride. And from water we'll have hydrogen and hydroxide ions. So these are like the four ions again which are present in NaCl solution. A concentration of sodium ion is greater than concentration of hydrogen ion, and concentration of chloride ion is higher than the OH ion because the solution is concentrated NaCl solution. So when we decide the reactions at cathode anode, cathode is negative electrode, anode is positive electrode. So when we decide the reactions at these two electrodes, अब आपने apply करना है that sequence or series that I wrote yesterday. उसको you need to apply that, and then we decide it. अब between sodium and hydrogen ion, which ion will discharge at cathode? Hydrogen. Although concentration of sodium is greater, but still hydrogen discharges because the difference in sodium and hydrogen is too large. ठीक है, मैंने ये बताया था that if the weaker ion is in greater concentration, it can go only if they are not more than two ions apart. दो ions से ज़्यादा का difference नहीं होना चाहिए. In this case, still hydrogen ion will go on the cathode. तो cathode पे जाके hydrogen ions will gain electron, and to write it balanced, we write 2H positive, 2 electron H2, and for the state symbols, aqueous and hydrogen is gas. That's reduction. ये आपने याद रखना है कि reduction happens at cathode, oxidation at anode. Cathode पे it's always reduction, anode पे oxidation. ठीक है? I write it most of the time with them, but it's a fact which you need to remember. Gain of electron happens at cathode and loss of electron at anode. Okay, so which of the negative ion? अब sequence series देख के बताओ शाबाश. Look at the series, madam. Qasim is right. दो का गैप है तो जाएगा ना, दो से ज्यादा नहीं होना चाहिए. So chloride and hydroxide में hydroxide is lower. Dilute solution में hydroxide ions will always go, but since it's a concentrated chloride solution, chloride ion can discharge now. ठीक है, they're not more than two ions apart from OH. So this is the only difference in dilute and concentrated NaCl electrolysis case में anode पे chloride ion will go and chlorine will be formed. कल के experiment में oxygen was formed. So that's the difference, right? Yeah, ये इसीलिए important experiment. So it's like 2 chloride ion will turn into chlorine gas. आप लगा दें, कोई मसला नहीं. Half Cl नहीं, उसको Cl and half Cl2. Half Cl2 और बाकी remain. हाँ, सही. ठीक है, perfectly fine. अब since I need to add these two equations to make the overall equation, that's why I've written the balanced electrons. अगर मैं इसको add करके overall equation बना रहा हूँ, No, it depends on the question. If examiner says, "Can you give overall equation of the reaction at cathode anode?" you'll have to add both half equations to write the overall equation. Loss of electron is at anode, that is oxidation. So when we add these two equations, I said yesterday that when you add reduction and oxidation equations, so you need to make sure the electrons are equal. So electrons equal hai, or we can cancel them out. What I'm left with is 2H positive plus 2Cl negative is H2 plus Cl2. I mean, these two are the products at cathode anode. So for the observation, like what do we see at cathode anode? So we see bubbles around cathode. Hydrogen gas is a colorless gas. उसके हम सिर्फ bubbles लिखेंगे. So bubbles at cathode. And then chlorine is formed around anode, and chlorine is green gas, right? So we write green fumes at anode. Chlorine is formed at anode, and it has green fumes. So green fumes at anode. So these would be the observation. See, it's the same beaker and that electrode diagram. Huh? Draw is हर दफा नहीं करे, but you should know कि for the solutions beaker diagram will be drawn, right? इसमें cathode anode. Typically we do that. Yes, cathode हम left पे दिखाते हैं, anode right. और cathode पे we get hydrogen gas bubbles, and anode पे we get chlorine gas fumes around the anode. So green fumes and bubbles of hydrogen gas. Okay, so in this case, you see what is happening is about the nature of solution left. I mean, once the current is passed, after some time, the nature of solution changes. ठीक है, उसके लिए next आप इसमें लिख सकते हैं. नहीं, observation बस यही दो हैं. But nature of solution left. ये important है. अच्छा, nature of solution left को decide करने के लिए I'll give you some idea and hint, and you people will tell me okay, what would be its nature, because you might get to answer it for some unknown electrolyte. उसके लिए look at the board now. अब देखो, I had these 4 ions in the experiment, right? I mean, 4 में से which ions have been used? Cl or H. Sure, ठीक है. Chloride ion and the net is here. नहीं, zoom नहीं है, zoom इधर ही है, नेट भी चल रहा है. अब सही नजर आ रहा है? बोर्ड हाईलाइट हो गया ना, ऑनलाइन वालों को नहीं नजर आ रहा होगा. चले. अच्छा देखो, hydrogen ion being used and chloride ion being used, right? So what we are left with is this. So what is sodium hydroxide? So what is NaOH? Base. So we started with a neutral NaCl solution. NaCl is a neutral solution, salt. And after some time, we start getting the basic solution, right? So the nature of solution left is that solution becomes basic. Due to increase in hydroxide ion concentration. Because of the increase in hydroxide ion concentration, the solution becomes basic. हाँ लाइट गई सर, लाइट गई है, क्या हुआ है ना? तो ये हमारा नेट पे उस पे था, यूपीएस पे। चले, काम चल गया। लाइट चली गई भैया, क्या करें? ग्लास, उससे क्या होगा? तो उसमें सारा टाइम मैं खुद नजर आऊंगा वो। ठीक है ठीक है। और खर्चे खर्चे वाले काम बताओ मुझे। घर वाले भी यही बताते थे, वो सारी रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही। अच्छा चले बेटा, अब इसमें एक दो और चीजें ऐड करेंगे, फिर एक्सपेरिमेंट नेक्स्ट करेंगे। देखें, the nature of the remaining solution is basic because of the hydroxide ion concentration. Don't write NaOH in it. Examiner says sometimes they tell you the remaining solution becomes basic, explain why, or identify the substance which makes it basic. उसमें आपने ये नहीं कहना कि NaOH, hydroxide, because you know a base has to be something which gives hydroxide ions in water, right? तो आपने hydroxide ion लिखना, पूरा NaOH नहीं लिखना। दूसरी बात ये कि NaOH never combines together to make a base. Sodium ions remain separate, hydroxide ion remains separate, right? So based on this concept, what else is asked in exam? Okay, if after the experiment we put some drops of red litmus solution in it, I mean the same concept is tested differently. Like we have done acid basis indicator and their colors and everything. तो अगर आपसे एग्जामिनर पूछ रहा है कि जी आफ्टर द एक्सपेरिमेंट वी हैव पुट सम ड्रॉप्स ऑफ रेड लिटमस सॉल्यूशन इनटू इट, तो व्हाट वी ऑब्जर्व, इट विल टर्न ब्लू, राइट? बट इन द स्टार्ट ऑफ द एक्सपेरिमेंट द सॉल्यूशन इज न्यूट्रल, तो इट वोंट गिव एनी कलर चेंज। हाँ, इन द स्टार्ट ऑफ द एक्सपेरिमेंट इफ आई पुट इंडिकेटर इन द बिगिनिंग, ठीक है, NaCl में भी मैंने करंट नहीं पास किया, I have not passed the current through it, I put red litmus solution into it, it stays red. But once the current is passed, after some time it will turn blue. That shows that the solution is turning basic. ठीक है, इसके साथ में ऐड कर देता हूँ कि it will turn or it turns red litmus into blue. UPS पे जाओ, turns red litmus into blue solution. तुम्हें दुख हो रहा है लाइट आने लगी? अच्छा, इसी में एक और चीज भी एग्जामिनर पूछ लेता है। आज आप लोग अच्छे रिस्पॉन्ड कर रहे हो, समझ रहे हो ध्यान से, तो आई ऐड दैट आल्सो। अब देखो मैंने तारीफ कर दी है ना, अब नजर लग जाएगी, सारे आंसर Mr. Omar, you better learn Urdu fast now. I can't talk English so much. Okay, so the same concept is tested in exam slightly differently. So you see this chlorine is formed at the anode. So sometime what examiner asks you is that this around the anode, during the electrolysis around the anode, through a dropper, like we have large droppers with which can actually reach the anode in the solution, and through that large dropper we put blue litmus into it around the anode. So if around anode we put blue litmus solution, it will change its color. Abhi I have not taught you the test of gases, so maybe you won't be able to answer it, but still the nature of chlorine gas is acidic. ठीक है, so when the chlorine gas is formed around anode और उसके ऊपर you put the blue litmus solution, it will turn red. But the property of chlorine is that it is bleaching agent also, it decolorizes. So it turns blue litmus into red and finally colorless, bleaches it. ठीक है, ये पूरा टेस्ट है. That shows that chlorine is formed around anode. I mean, sometimes they ask you how would you test and confirm that chlorine is formed around anode. एक तो green fumes, secondly we can test it through blue litmus solution around it. इसको भी मैं इधर स्टार्ट में ब्लू होगा और वो उसको रेड कर देगा ना, वो तो अनचेंज्ड होगा, उसमें कोई चेंज नहीं। ब्लीच करता है लेकिन दैट्स नॉट द टेस्ट इवन, बिकॉज उसकी रीजन ये है because it's large solution, so if I put few drops तो वो red जाके disappear हो जाएगा, I won't even know it. तो red से blue से red and then colorless, तो we would know for sure कि जी क्या है इसमें. Yes. I mean, if your objective is to test an acidic substance, so we always put blue litmus solution, and if you want to test something basic, so we put red letter. इस तरह से इसको हम लिख लेते हैं यहाँ पर कि इसी के नीचे आप ऐड कर लें a few drops of blue litmus is added around anode. It turns into red and finally colorless, or finally changes into colorless solution or turns colorless. Among all the electrolysis experiments, this concentrated NaCl is most important one. Uski reason ये है कि it has these few points added in it beside the reactions and everything. That's why I've spent enough time on it. अब इसके बाद the next experiment is electrolysis of sulfuric acid solution, dilute sulfuric acid. तो फिर concentrated, लेकिन ये अब you guys will try yourself. I'll give you the idea and help. लेकिन the third is electrolysis of dilute sulfuric acid solution. Dilute sulfuric acid solution. So what you have to simply do is that try and fill the same things. Ions लिखोगे पहले आप, फिर reactions at cathode, anode. बस ये तीन चीजें करनी है आपने. For the ions, you could add, what ions could you have in sulfuric acid? Hydrogen will come from sulfuric acid, and water से क्या आएगा? Hydrogen ion and OH. So technically your positive ion is same. So we don't have any problem for cathode reaction. उधर तो hydrogen ion है सिर्फ.
यहाँ -2 लिखेंगे जैसे भी माइनस
सल्फेट पूरा चार्ज लिखना है, -2, sulfate is -2. Okay, so among the ions, sulfuric acids we get hydrogen and sulfate ion. From water we get hydrogen and hydroxide ions. Again, cathode के लिए we don't have any problem because the positive ion is just hydrogen ion. So it would be like 2H positive ion again plus 2 electron would form H2. but between sulfate and hydroxide ions, which ion will go to anode? Hydroxide. In fact, sulfate never discharges. Sulfate is so high in the series that as per your syllabus, none of the electrolyte will give sulfate and nitrate at the anode. तो आपने उनकी टेंशन ही नहीं लेनी. You guys need to simply remember chloride, bromide, iodide, hydroxide. If in some experiment sulfate ion will discharge, examiner will tell you the products of it. Sulfate ion ka discharge is not even in A level, so you don't need to worry about that. These are like sulfate and nitrate ions are there in the series, so that you know okay, these are the major ions and they don't discharge fast against hydroxide. इसलिए hydroxide के लिए 4OH, I mean the equation that I wrote yesterday, वही आपने याद कर लेनी और लिख देनी है. 4 हाइड्रोक्साइड, इसको बैलेंस कर ले. हाँ, 1 ऑक्सीजन, क्या हुआ? 4 हाइड्रोक्साइड आयंस गिव 2 वाटर एंड 1 ऑक्सीजन. कल ये इक्वेशन लिखी थी हमने मोमिन, NaCl की जब हमने इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस की थी, तो I wrote this equation and I said कि hydroxide will always give this equation and you have to simply memorize it and dilute NaCl में. I mean whatever solution, if hydroxide ions are going at anode, तो यही reaction होगा सब में. So आपने इसको याद कर लेना. So it's like hydroxide, aqueous, liquid, gas. जी हाँ, products लिखेंगे because इसमें many times students write water in product and that is wrong. कल भी मैंने बताया था, water stays in solution and gets electrolyzed. So what product would be overall equation? वो हाइड्रोजन और OH से वाटर ही बनेगा. तो प्रोडक्ट्स में हाइड्रोजन गैस एंड ऑक्सीजन गैस. ओवरऑल में अगर आपने लिखनी है ना, अब जगह ही नहीं बची, किधर लिखूं? चलो प्रोडक्ट लिख लिए, इधर ही लिख देता हूँ नीचे स्टेट सिंबल हटा के. ओवरऑल इक्वेशन लिखने के लिए आप लोग मुझे बताएं व्हाट विल यू डू फर्स्ट. बताया मैंने, अगर आपने दो इक्वेशंस को ऐड करना है तो व्हाट डू यू नीड टू मेक श्योर इलेक्ट्रॉन इक्वल करने. इसमें यू गॉट 2 इलेक्ट्रॉन, इसमें 4. So what do? We multiply. कहता रहने दो. We multiply this equation by 2 so that the electrons become 4. So I multiply the first equation by 2 so that electrons become 4. So when we multiply this equation by 2, it will become what? 4H positive. Everything multiplies, right? So this will become 4H positive. आप बेशक दोबारा अलग से बना लें equation. Multiply करके 2 से, that will be 4 hydrogen, 4 electron, 2H2. This would be my equation to balance electrons. I multiplied cathode reaction by 2. अब जब मैं इसको ऐड करूंगा to things which are common in reactant and product, we cancel them out. That's 4 electron cancelled. So what we left with is 4H positive plus 4OH negative, give 2H2O plus 4 2 and O2 H2 2H2. ये इसकी overall net equation बनेगी. So simply you just have to multiply the equation to balance electrons, and cathode equation was multiplied by 2. Products are cathode and oxygen cathode. The product at cathode and anode are oxygen and, but what we have in this solution eventually is water as well. वो इसीलिए कैटेगोरिकली प्रोडक्ट को मैंने अलग से भी लिखा है, फिर कि उसमें आपने वाटर नहीं बताना. अच्छा, अब ऑब्जर्वेशन में अगेन कैथोड एनोड पे बबल्स. हाइड्रोजन एंड ऑक्सीजन आर बोथ कलरलेस गैसेस, सो बबल्स एट बोथ इलेक्ट्रोड्स. बबल्स ये इन्हीं पे नंबर करते हैं. Both electrodes. Graphite, like cathode anode electrodes are called electrodes generally. दोनों को. अच्छा, इसी के साथ क्विकली What if the solution of sulfuric acid was concentrated? तो concentrated solution में what would happen? Okay, we'll have nothing happening. Hydrogen ion will be greater than hydrogen ion. Same thing. So no problem for cathode, right? Sulfate ion greater than this. अभी मैंने कहा कि sulfate ion will never discharge from the anode. So what does it mean? It means whether the solution is dilute sulfuric acid or concentrated, the reaction and the product and everything is same. So technically, with this title or the heading at the top, you could write electrolysis of dilute sulfuric acid or concentrated sulfuric acid. दोनों का सब सेम है, डिफरेंट नहीं है, ठीक है, इट्स सेम, सारा सेम, 100% सेम. वर्ड्स में लिख लें बेशक कि electrolysis of dilute and concentrated sulfuric acid is similar. Is similar, बिल्कुल सेम है, कोई डिफरेंस नहीं है इसमें, ठीक है. अच्छा, दूसरी बात ये एक और इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट है. If we have any random acid in the electrolysis, I mean, if I have any other acid instead of sulfuric acid, maybe like sulfuric acid की जगह I got HCl, HNO3 and any other acid. So you see, an acid would always give hydrogen ion at the cathode. Water will give always hydrogen ion. So what does it mean? If the solution is an acid, the cathode पे it would always be hydrogen gas which will be formed, right? वो छोड़ो उसको, हाँ वो तो accordingly होगी ना, product cathode पे hydrogen ही होगा. So this thing helps you to answer the products in MCQs where the examiner gives you some random acid and they ask you what's formed at cathode. And if you know whatever acid is given cathode पे we only get hydrogen gas, so you can actually save time in that question. मैं इसको लिख देता हूँ कि during the electrolysis of an acid, hydrogen gas is always formed at cathode. ठीक है, ये आपने याद रखना है. अच्छा, अब आप लोगों को मैं एक होमवर्क दे रहा हूँ क्योंकि अभी लाइट नहीं है. मैं जरा जाके पूछूं क्या मसला, ये ना हो कि यूपीएससी बंद हो जाए हमारा. आप लोगों ने ये इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस एक्सपेरिमेंट करने हैं खुद से. इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस ऑफ dilute HCl and concentrated HCl. Two experiments. You just need to maybe write their ions, the equations at cathode, anode, observation and all that. But you do it at home. ठीक है, अभी नहीं करना, घर पे रिवाइज करके करेंगे ना तो टॉपिक रिवाइज होता पूरा. मुझे पता है इतने अच्छे थोड़ी यहाँ पे. तो ये आप लोगों ने घर पे करने हैं. इसमें सल्फ्यूरिक एसिड की इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस डाइल्यूट कंसंट्रेटेड वो सेम, लेकिन HCl में इट डजंट रिमेन सेम, इसमें थोड़ा फर्क है. ठीक है, इसलिए मैंने ये आपको दिया मुश्किल वाला. तो नहीं करेंगे, क्यों नहीं. ओके बेटा, ऑनलाइन वाले आई नो कि आप लोगों को स्क्रीन इतनी अच्छी नजर नहीं आ रही, लेकिन लाइट नहीं है, बस मैं इसको रोकता हूँ यहाँ पे. ठीक है, ये दो एक्सपेरिमेंट आप लोगों ने खुद रिएक्शंस बनाने हैं, ट्राई करने हैं इसको. ठीक है, और क्या हो रहा है, यूपीएस लगाया, मजाक थोड़ी. मैं तो खुश हो गया हूँ लाइट गई है, यूपीएस यूज हो रहा है. ओके बेटा, अल्लाह हाफिज.